This is my review for the Xenofeminist Manifesto. So I haven't read this review in a while, but I'll read it for y'all before we get in to actually reading the document itself. There might be some things that I have changed my opinion on between the time I wrote this and now, but we'll see. Alright, so my chief complaint for this document in particular is that this is written in an unnecessarily academic and inaccessible sort of language, which ironically serves to alienate, the majority of people who may be best poised to benefit from this politics. You don't want to go, but you have to, because you have to, eat pie? Yeah, see you around, theory. Alright, so for most of the issues discussed, the authors seem to be in agreement with my own views. However, I found that it simply didn't bring much new to the table. Maybe these ideas were fresher in 2015, but when reading this in 2019, it already seems a bit stale. A lot of things could simply go without saying. Repeated calls for intersectionality, anti-capitalism, critiques of liberal feminism, etc. are perhaps more appropriate for a less advanced document. Anyone who has the background in feminist academia that is almost surely necessary to read and understand this text has most likely heard such things countless times before. It seems to me that many of the issues that the authors have with the modern feminist discourse are mostly online problems, so to speak. Maybe this text would be more useful for someone who is steeped in daily Twitter drama, Peter Coffin, but for myself, this is not the case. They mentioned building a framework to facilitate feminist interventions in online spaces, which I'd love to hear more about, but they didn't expand on this concept. We'll see if Helen Hester is one of the authors of the manifesto. I have her book, so at some point I'll have to go through it and see if she has anything specific on that, but yeah. Alright, the more interesting portions of this text for me were mostly the portions concerning IRL praxis, including but not limited to building dual power structures for healthcare, which we'll get into, using architecture to fight ingrained patriarchal structures such as the nuclear family, and anonymizing scientific discourse, which has some, that's a big pile of crap to get into, but yeah. These are, however, not new ideas by any stretch. Specifically regarding the nuclear family structure, I think it's important to point out that, at least in the United States, this has increasingly disappeared among the younger generations due to stagnant wages, making it impossible for the majority of families to survive on a single income. Additionally, the complete lack of any mandatory paid family leave puts a massive strain on poorer American families who are already heavily limited from accessing things like reproductive health care and child care due to the prohibited costs of such services. So this isn't really a totally America-centric document, but because I'm American, I have to put my own, thing on it. I think it's very important to take this into account because it's extremely difficult for such families who are rapidly growing in number to be active in feminist movements. Additionally, an increasing, and by feminist movements, I mean these sort of academic things that we're talking about in this document, which is why I think this document isn't very helpful. Additionally, an increasing number of people are so burdened by the relentless pressures of American capitalism and growing unease about unchecked climate change that they're delaying or forgoing having children. With the traditional family structure rapidly moving to the wayside due to the increasing oppression of the American worker, we need to radically rethink how we push for positive social change, and the authors seem to acknowledge this by advocating for an economy that liberates reproductive labor and family life. This is, for me, the most important issue for modern American feminist movements to be focused on. I have a book recommendation for that topic as well that we'll get to later. The concept of gender abolitionism as defined in this text, keyword as defined in this text, is something that I can get behind. However, and the authors indeed take note of this specific terminology has been co-opted by TERFs. I don't see this going away anytime soon. This is why, if you've ever interacted with me, you know that I take a mildly gender abolitionist stance, but I do not use that word or that term. It's just too appropriated at this point. The anti-naturalist stance that the authors take is also quite enticing to me, and I think it's very important that queer and feminist movements take hold of it. The document ends with what is definitely my favorite line of the whole text: if nature is unjust, change nature. Overall, I found this text to be simultaneously a very interesting read, simply due to its obscurity, but rather unhelpful due to its relentless academic jargon, needless repetition, and outright lack of new or concrete ideas. We'll get to that. Read it if you're able and willing, which I will attempt to assist with in this stream, but don't expect anything radically new or immediately actionable. Perhaps it could be useful as an outline for a much larger and more accessibly written work. We'll get to Helen Hester's book eventually. Probably not in this stream, but we will get to it. So this manifesto was basically written for like somebody, the Laboria Kumanics, the people who wrote this, kind of did this. Hide that one, millennial. Thank you for following. They did this, as like their grad project or whatever, right, for school. And so the academic stuff is just really, really, really heavy, and so there's, it's just a mess. Okay, so we're going to try to read this now. It usually takes me 4 or 5 hours to read through this, but I have notes this time, so maybe it won't. And I know how long it usually takes me to read this because I've done it a lot. And it doesn't get any easier at all. So I might do this over more than one stream, unless I want a really long stream, which I probably don't want to do, not with this kind of really annoyingly high-level jargon and whatnot. Alright, so it's structured kind of interestingly. We have it, they go with this sort of cyberpunk aesthetic. It starts with 0x00. And it's all in hexadecimal for the heading numbers. Anyway. Alright, I'll just read off each paragraph or whatever and start interjecting comments to try and explain what they might be getting at. Alright. Ours is a world in vertigo. It is a world that swarms with technological mediation, interlacing our daily lives with abstraction, virtuality, and complexity. Xenofeminism constructs a feminism adapted to these realities, a feminism of unprecedented cunning, scale, and vision, a future in which the realization of gender justice and feminist emancipation contribute to a universalist politics assembled from the needs of every human, cutting across every race, ability, economic standing, and geographical position. No more futureless repetition on the treadmill of capital, no more submission to the drudgery of labor, productive and reproductive alike, no more reification of the given masked as critique. Our future requires de-petrification. So they're accelerationists, in case you couldn't figure that out. Xenofeminism is not a bid for revolution, but a wager on the long game of history demanding imagination, dexterity, and persistence. They say it's not a bid for revolution, but then they basically go, it's really interesting to try and figure out what are they actually advocating for in terms of any sort of organizational structure, and that's one of the problems, is that they never really specify what they're really trying to do. They have the usual, like, oh, we're sort of centrists between anarchism and like Marxist-Leninism or whatever, and it's like, yeah, but what does that mean? Because it's hard to find an actual movement or organization that takes that stance. Alright, so the notes I have for that section is basically, so it's more of an outline, I guess, is that we live in a crazy hell world, and to adapt to it, xenofeminism must take a universalist stance that is need-driven, anti-capitalist, anti-national potentially, and anti-naturalist, and they have a very accelerationist stance. The accelerationism is potentially due to climate change, which I would maybe agree with. Maybe. Alright. This isn't, this is not really an amazing amount of stuff here in that paragraph, and yet it's so long, and you'll find that that's the case with every single one of these paragraphs. Alright. Xenofeminism seizes alienation as an impetus to generate new worlds. So, capitalist alienation is what they're mostly getting at, but they use it in other ways as well. So if you're familiar with like the Marxist concept of alienation, like alienated labor, where you make like one small part of a thing, for example, in a factory, but then you never actually get to see like the final product of your labor, and you don't get to own the final product of your labor either. You get a wage in return for a certain amount of time worked, but the actual product of your labor is not something that you have access to. Right. Anyway, so we are all alienated, but have we ever been otherwise? It is through and not despite our alienated condition that we can free ourselves from the muck of immediacy. Freedom is not a given, and it's certainly not given by anything natural. And the natural is in quotes. We'll get to the anti-naturalism stuff, but it's important to note that they don't mean like natural human rights. Like they're saying that there's not really any such thing as natural, God-given human rights, so to speak, but rather those things must be decided on and taken or built. All right. The construction of freedom, construct it, there you go. The construction of freedom involves not less but more alienation. Alienation is the labor of freedom's construction. Nothing should be accepted as fixed, permanent, or given, neither material conditions nor social forms. Xenofeminism mutates, navigates, and probes every horizon. Anyone who's been deemed unnatural in the face of reigning biological norms, anyone who's experienced injustices wrought in the name of natural order, will realize that the glorification of nature has nothing to offer us. The queer and trans among us, the differently abled, as well as those who have suffered discrimination due to pregnancy or duties connected to child rearing. Xenofeminism is vehemently anti-naturalist. Essentialist naturalism reeks of theology. The sooner it is exercised, the better. Yeah, so very against the idea of like human nature and whatnot, which I would definitely agree with. Let's see here. But I think it's also, so the thing about the nature thing is that they don't technically oppose nature, the idea of nature, right? What they're opposed to is the construct of nature as it has been constructed by the powers that be, so to speak. The idea that somebody with somebody who is trans, for example, is unnatural or whatever, but they would be probably perfectly fine with the idea that it's saying that it's, for example, perfectly natural to be some sort of queer person or whatever. It's more of a, so let's, like at the very end it says, if nature is unjust, change nature. It's just sort of their tagline. So they say they're anti-naturalist, but it's when they say natural, they mean the existing ideas of what is considered to be natural or unnatural. Which is one of the semantic arguments that comes up also with the gender abolition thing. Is it's like the difference between saying like abolish all of the socially constructed forced gender roles versus abolish gender. the fact is that gender has never existed in or gender as we would call it, has never existed in any form other than like forced socially constructed gender roles. So to say that those are two different things is a little bit missing the point, and people get really hung up on the abolishing gender thing, which is kind of annoying because we can never get past like the first step if we're just always arguing about defining terms. Okay. Number 2, which is actually number 3 because we started at 0. Why is there so little explicit, organized effort to repurpose technologies for progressive gender political ends? Xenofeminism seeks to strategically deploy existing technologies to re-engineer the world. Serious risks are built into these tools. They are prone to imbalance, abuse, and exploitation of the weak. Rather than pretending to risk nothing, xenofeminism advocates the necessary assembly of techno-political interfaces, whatever that means, responsive to these risks. Technology isn't inherently progressive. True. Its uses are fused with culture in a positive feedback loop that makes linear sequencing, prediction, and absolute caution impossible. Technoscientific innovation must be linked to a collective theoretical and political thinking in which women, queers, and the gender non-conforming play an unparalleled role. So, what did I want to say about? Let's see here. I've got. Yeah, so basically they're warning against just the direct appropriation of existing technologies, because the existing technologies have been usually created for the express purpose of making money for somebody, and under capitalism, it's very likely that making money for somebody is going to hurt somebody else. So those technologies may not be very, they're usually agnostic, and also used in ways that are oppressive. Alright. 3 or 4. The real emancipatory potential of technology. Wow, I fucked that up. Real emancipatory potential of technology remains unrealized. Fed by the market, its rapid growth is offset by bloat, and elegant innovation is surrendered to the buyer whose stagnant world it decorates. Beyond the noisy clutter of commodified cruft, the ultimate task lies in engineering technologies to combat unequal access to reproductive and pharmacological tools, environmental cataclysm, economic instability, as well as dangerous forms of unpaid or underpaid labor. Gender inequality still characterizes the fields in which our technologies are conceived, built, and legislated for, while female workers in electronics, to name just one industry, perform some of the worst paid, monotonous, and debilitating labor. Such injustice demands structural, mechanic, and ideological correction. So, yeah, not really anything new, not much different from the last one. Let's see here. Yeah, I mean, there's no hot takes here. Capitalism or the profit motive stifles proper innovation, externalizes risks, it has unnecessary redundancies due to, for example, intellectual property laws. The existing... Hi, Mixtheo. We're just talking about the Xenofeminist Manifesto, and maybe we'll get into some stuff with the gender abolition argument that people seem to always want, because that's definitely in here. It's in here eventually. I don't remember what point they get to it, but let's see here. Yeah, so the existing modes of production contribute to the oppression of GSRM people, women, etc., and this must be corrected somehow. And that's the key, is that they always say we need to do X, but they don't actually say how we're supposed to do X, or even how we should begin thinking about how to do X. The problem with this document is that's what they do that all the time. Alright, so xenofeminism is a rationalism. To claim that reason or rationality is by nature a patriarchal enterprise is to concede defeat. Right, no hot takes there. It is true that the canonical history of thought is dominated by men, and it is male hands we see throttling existing institutions of science and technology. But this is precisely why feminism must be a rationalism, because of this miserable imbalance and not despite it. So they might be fighting back a little bit against the sort of there are some subcurrents in feminist movements that are like outright opposed to science because or the science the scientific establishment because of its domination by patriarchal bullshit, and also usually want to inject or go entirely to some sort of primitivist or heavily, spiritual societal structure, which I think they're pushing back on that idea here. Yeah, okay, so there is no feminine rationality, nor is there a masculine one. Science is not an expression, but a suspension of gender. If today is dominated by masculine egos, then it is at odds with itself, and this contradiction can be leveraged. Reason, like information, wants to be free, and patriarchy cannot give it freedom. Rationalism must itself be a feminism. Xenofeminism marks the point where these claims intersect in a two-way dependency. It names reason as an engine of feminist emancipation and declares the right of everyone to speak as no one in particular. So this is sort of they're talking about de-gendering science, but also anonymizing science perhaps completely. And I need to read Helen Hester's book to find out what she really wants on that part, but it's not too important, I think, at this moment in time. So let's see here. So section 2 is called interrupt for some reason. Yeah, they're very nerdy, very computer geeky, which is whatever, but it's it makes this kind of inaccessible, but whatever. Okay, so the excess of modesty in feminist agendas of recent decades is not proportionate to the monstrous complexity of our reality. And there's a bunch of bullshit here. A reality of cross-hatched with fiber optic cables, radio and microwaves, oil and gas pipelines, aerial and shipping routes, and the unrelenting simultaneous execution of millions of communication protocols with every passing millisecond. Oh, please just cut all this stuff out. It's so annoying. We don't need it. We don't need your illustrations. Okay, systematic thinking and structural analysis have largely fallen by the wayside in favor of admirable but insufficient struggles bound to fixed localities and fragmented insurrections. They're just... there's nothing hot... there's no hot takes here, It's all just, oh yeah, liberal feminism is lame. Yeah, we agree. That's the whole point. That's why we're here. Whilst capitalism is understood as a complex and ever-expanding totality, many would-be emancipatory anti-capitalist projects remain profoundly fearful of transitioning to the universal, resisting big-picture speculative politics by condemning them as necessarily oppressive vectors. Such a false guarantee treats universals as absolute, generating a debilitating disjuncture between the thing we seek to depose and the strategies we advance to depose it. So they don't like liberal feminism, and they don't like every version of feminism that's against capitalism that has existed so far, apparently. Which, I mean, there are potential, you could say, well, has feminism succeeded yet? Have any of these movements succeeded? And the answer is no. So I guess you could say that they're right in that regard. I think that's usually the same argument that people like to use. It's usually the same argument that tankies like to use when they say they don't like anarchism, because they think, oh, well, they can't defend against imperialism, right? So this is sort of the same argument, actually. But for saying that the existing anti-capitalist oriented feminist movements cannot actually do anything or haven't done anything, and therefore they're not great. Yeah, I don't know. It's they'd have to give more specifics. Right. I don't really have much notes for that one. Okay. Global complexity opens us to urgent cognitive and ethical demands. These are Promethean responsibilities that cannot pass unaddressed. Much of 21st century feminism, from the remnants of postmodern identity politics to large swaths of contemporary ecofeminism, struggles to adequately address these challenges in a manner capable of producing substantial and enduring change. Right, it's the same thing as the last paragraph. Xenofeminism endeavors to face up to these obligations as collective agents capable of transitioning between multiple levels of political, material, and conceptual organization. I have no idea what that's supposed to mean. They're never specific enough. Like, yeah, you shouldn't be focused on praxis in one particular space, I guess. One particular mode of communication, one particular style of organization, I guess is what they're saying. Which basically just means that... So, later they say that xenofeminism is a platform, which to me makes them sound like they're platformists, but platformism is kind of a specific thing, so I'm not really sure about that. But I feel like if your platform doesn't include organizational structure, then what are you actually planning to do? Like, if it's just the reforms that we want implemented, that's not much of a platform. Like, you actually have to have a plan for how to do that. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. Alright, we are adamantly synthetic, unsatisfied by analysis alone. Xenofeminism urges constructive they love to use puns and stuff. It's actually really annoying. Xenofeminism urges constructive oscillation between description and prescription to mobilize the recursive potential of contemporary technologies upon gender, sexuality, and disparities of power. Given that there are a range of gender challenges specifically relating to life in the digital age, from sexual harassment via social media to doxing, privacy, and the protection of online images, the situation requires a feminism at ease with computation. Right, no hot takes. Today, it is imperative that we develop an ideological infrastructure that both supports and facilitates feminist interventions within connective networked elements of the contemporary world. Xenofeminism is about more than digital self-defense and freedom from patriarchal networks. We want to cultivate the exercise of positive freedom, freedom to rather than simply freedom from, and urge feminists to equip themselves with the skills to redeploy existing technologies and invent novel cognitive and material tools in the service of common ends. So let's see, my notes. I have theory informs praxis and vice versa. Yeah, they've got a bit of a almost a Maoist bent on it. It's kind of weird. Feminism at ease with computation. But I mean, like, yeah, okay. Don't be boomers. Is that what they're saying? Is that really all they have to say here? That's what I'm, it's like some of these things seem too obvious. Feminist interventions within connective networked elements of the contemporary world. What sort of interventions are they looking at, I guess, is what I want to know. Alright, and then, yeah, I like the positive freedom bit, but once again, not exactly a hot take. Don't trust me, multiple people who wrote this are trans. They didn't mean it in whatever way you think it might mean there. The radical opportunities afforded by developing and alienating forms of technological mediation should no longer be put to use in the exclusive interests of capital, which by design only benefits the few. Okay, yeah, no hot takes. There are incessantly proliferating tools to be annexed, and although no one can claim their comprehensive accessibility, digital tools have never been more widely available or more sensitive to appropriation than they are today. This is not an illusion of the fact that a large amount of the world's poor is adversely affected by the expanding technological industry, from factory workers laboring under abominable conditions in the Ghanaian villages that have become a repository for the e-waste of the global powers, but an explicit acknowledgement of these conditions as a target for elimination. Basically, we must be careful about what technologies we appropriate and what technologies we allow to persist in order to, not fuck over people who are currently being fucked over by the production or use of those technologies. Just as the invention of the stock market was also the invention of the crash, xenofeminism knows that the technological innovation must equally anticipate its systemic condition responsively. Alright, so, let's see here. Oh, here we go. So basically, oh, that was 8. Okay, yeah, so basically, they're saying, communism is cool, I guess. They're saying scene's the means of production, basically, but be careful of the potential problems that the said means of production might cause if they are continued to be used in the same manner that they are. It's not just about seizing the means of production, putting the means of production into the hands of the people. It's also about using them in different ways. Alright. Here we go, number 9, which is actually number 10. Xenofeminism rejects illusion and melancholy as political inhibitors. Okay. Great. What does that mean? Who knows? They're going to try and tell us what it means, but, illusion as the blind presumption that the weak can prevail over the strong with no strategic coordination leads to unfulfilled promises and unmarshaled drives. I don't know if this is supposed to be like a jab at anarchists or something, but do they think that anarchists don't have organizational structure at all or something? I don't know. That's a common misconception. So I think these people would know better, but whatever. This is a politics that, in wanting so much, ends up building so little. I think what they're actually critiquing is the excess of very small, independent feminist movements that have basically failed completely because there's no global movement, right? There's nothing that's coordinated in any way. Okay. This is a politics that, in wanting so much, ends up building so little. Without the labor of a large-scale collective social organization, declaring one's desire for global change is nothing more than wishful thinking. On the other hand, melancholy, so endemic to the left, okay, hun, teaches us that emancipation is an extinct species to be wept over, and that blips of negation are the best we can hope for. Yeah, I don't know who the fuck they're talking about. This is another problem. They always complain about people. They complain about things that I never hear people actually saying. Who on the left, and I mean the actual left, and not suckdems, who on the left is saying that we need to just mildly reform capitalism? If you were saying that, you wouldn't be on the left. That's not the definition of the left. Okay, anyway, teaches us that emancipation is an extinct species. Okay, right. At its worst, such an attitude generates nothing but political lassitude, whatever that means. And at its best, it solves an atmosphere of pervasive despair, which too often degenerates into factionalism and petty moralizing. I mean, what are they just complaining about people who think, oh yeah, it would be great if we had a revolution or something, but that will never happen. I mean, are you really, like, you like, sure, you're anti-capitalist, I guess, right? If you're saying that, but like, are you, what are you doing? Are you really actually doing anything? Like, if your politics extends to nothing more than complaining about something and then saying, but there's nothing we can do about it, your politics are useless, and you shouldn't really be counted as part of a specific political faction if that's the case. Anyway, okay. The malady of melancholia only compounds political inertia, and under the guise of being realistic, relinquishes all hope of calibrating the world otherwise. It is against such maladies that xenofeminism inoculates. Yeah, I mean, I guess they're just annoyed at people giving up, but like, you know, who on the left is giving up? I mean, maybe this is some of the thing I said in my review, right? Is that maybe some of these things were true in leftist Twitter discourse in 2015, but are they true now in 2019? I would say no, right? I think the revolutionary spirit has significantly been rekindled since the election. You know, they wrote this in 2015, so they didn't really know what was to come, maybe, you know? They couldn't see the currents moving leftwards and more fiery. I don't know. Alright, we take politics, wait, what did I write? Yeah, okay. We take politics that exclusively valorize the local in the guise of subverting currents of global extraction to be insufficient. To secede from or disavow capitalist machinery will not make it disappear. Likewise, suggestions to pull the lever on the emergency brake of embedded velocities, the call to slow down and scale back, is a possibility only available to the few, a violent particularity of exclusivity, ultimately entailing catastrophe for the many. Refusing to think beyond the micro-community, to foster connections between fractured insurgencies, to consider how emancipatory tactics can be scaled up for universal implementation, is to remain satisfied with temporary and defensive gestures. Xenofeminism is an affirmative creature on the offensive, fiercely insisting on the possibility of large-scale social change for all of our alien kin. Right? So they don't like localism, basically. They're not a fan of... Like, I'm not sure who they're talking about when they're talking about, like, people who are calling for moderation. Who are they talking about? I'm assuming they're trying to critique some group on the left, but I don't really know who. Who's calling for moderation? Suckdems? Suckdems aren't really, you know, I don't get, you know, I don't know the history of these people. I don't know who they were and what sort of organizing were they involved with. I mean, they wrote this thing for their graduate thesis or whatever, right? Like, that's what they did. I feel like they're really disconnected from a lot of the discourse, but this was 2015, so maybe the discourse really was this lame back then. I don't know. Anyway. Alright, so A. We already did A. Okay. B. The sense of the world's volatility and artificiality seems to have faded from contemporary queer and feminist politics in favor of a plural but static constellation of gender identities. Okay, here comes the fun part. This is where everyone will start arguing. In whose bleak light equations of the good and natural are stubbornly restored. So this is where they go really hard against the gender essentialism stuff, and eventually are going to call for gender abolition, which we'll get into. While having perhaps admirably expended thresholds of tolerance Too often we are told to seek solace in unfreedom, staking claims on being born this way, as if offering an excuse with nature's blessing. All the while, the heteronormative center chugs on. Xenofeminism challenges this centrifugal referent, knowing full well that sex and gender are exemplary of the fulcrum between norm and fact, between freedom and compulsion. To tilt the fulcrum in the direction of nature is a defensive concession at best, and a retreat from what makes trans and queer politics more than just a lobby. That it is an arduous assertion of freedom against an order that seemed immutable. Basically, so the problem with what they're saying is, I don't have a problem with them on an ideological level. Like but the problem, I think, is that they're calling for, this is the same thing that it says in the Communist Manifesto, where it says that the socialists or the communists need to be completely open about their views and completely, unashamed in what they're calling for, and not trying to mask anything that they're saying. So basically what they're saying here is, instead of saying, for example, that you were born this way as some sort of queer person or whatever, you're saying that, even if it were a choice, so to speak, right, it shouldn't matter. That's the point, usually, right? Is essentially what they're saying. From an optics perspective, it depends really, really hard on where in the world you're located and what the politics are at the time. I think there are a lot of places where you need to have either support from the outside in order to push a more radical agenda like this, or you are going to have to give in to the nature stuff and try and say, well, there's nothing I can do about being gay or whatever. So I have to have rights based on that, which is, that basically gives them the, it's like you're letting them say that, being queer is bad, but there's nothing you can do about it, so I won't punish you for it, which is bullshit. Okay. Where were we? Like every myth of the given, a stable foundation is fabulated for a real world of chaos, violence, and doubt. The given is sequestered into the private realm as a certainty, whilst retreating on fronts of public consequences. When the possibility of transition between real and known, the tomb under nature's shine cracked, and new histories, bristling with futures, escaped the old order of sex. The disciplinary grid of gender is in no small part an attempt to mend that shattered foundation and tame the lives that escaped it. So what they're saying is that the modern academic concept of gender that started appearing in maybe the 50s and 60s appeared only in order to try to explain away trans people, and what they're saying is that it shouldn't matter, basically. That there shouldn't be a need for some scientifically proven reason why trans people exist and should have rights. Okay, anyway, let's see here. The time has now come to tear down this shrine entirely and not bow down before it in a piteous apology for what the little autonomy has been won. So basically they're calling for outright gender abolition here, and there's more on that later. So we're gonna pin it in the gender abolition, which is weird. I don't know why they do that, and then like you have to skip a bunch to get to the rest of it. Anyway, all right, let's see. Do I have any special notes for that one? No, nothing special that I haven't already gone over there. All right, C. If cyberspace once offered the promise of escaping the strictures of essentialist identity categories, the climate of contemporary social media has swung forcefully in the other direction. Oh God, here we go, and has become a theater where these prostrations to identity are performed. So we're just critiquing liberal identity politics and how it has infected Twitter discourse, essentially. With these curatorial practices come puritanical rituals of moral maintenance, and these stages are too often overrun with the disavowed pleasures of accusation, shaming, and denunciation. They're complaining about cancel culture, guys, and gals and pals. Oh no, we can't escape it. Valuable platforms for connection, organization, and skill sharing become clogged with obstacles to productive debate positioned as if they are debate. These puritanical politics to shame purity testing, guys, cancel culture. Oh no. Which fetishize oppression as if it were a blessing. Oh my God, they're falling into this trap so hard. Oh my God. Oh my God, this is so bad. They're like, okay, here's the thing. What they're saying, they're critiquing liberal identity politics from the left, but the way they're doing it is like through right-wing talking points, and it just hurts to read this. It's like they're correct in that these are the things that right-wingers don't like about liberal identity politics. But like, do we have to actually point that out in a way as if the right-wingers are really correct about why liberal identity politics are bad? No, you don't have to give in to, you don't have to say, see, look, even these right-wingers see that the liberals are bad. You don't have to do that, because the things that the right-wingers think are wrong with liberal identity politics are optics-wise, whereas the things that the left-wingers think are wrong with liberal identity politics are, you know, structural issues, like things that actually matter. So here we go. Cloud the waters in moralistic frenzies, leave us cold. We want neither clean hands nor beautiful souls, neither virtue nor terror. We want superior forms of corruption. So this is, you know, this is the good part, right? Like, fuck you. There's no point in like, so what this is what they're kind of getting at. This is what I don't like, is like, it's like, it almost sounds to me like what they're saying is we shouldn't celebrate diversity. But then it also says we want superior forms of corruption. Like, we want, like, they're saying we want more diversity, and but we also want to not celebrate certain types of, I don't really know what, it contradicts itself a bit here in terms of where are they arguing from at this point. I can't tell. Like, they're supposedly left, right? They're definitely left. But like, there's some right-wing crap in here, where I think that they're just, there's no reason for you to be critiquing liberal identity politics if you're on the like, everyone agrees with you already here. Nobody who is reading this document who has the education required or the background in academic feminism and leftist theory is going to disagree with you on the fact that liberal identity politics is bad. All right. Yeah. Okay. D. What this shows is that the task of engineering platforms for social emancipation and organizing cannot ignore the cultural and semiotic mutations these platforms afford. What requires re-engineering are the mimetic parasites arousing and coordinating behaviors in ways occluded by their host's self-image. Failing this, memes like anonymity, ethics, social justice, and privilege checking host social dynamisms at odds with the often commendable intentions with which they are taken up. Basically, they're saying that, once again, the optics of liberal idpol suck. We know. Why criticize the liberals? How can you, if you, instead of criticizing the liberals, which has been done a million times, criticize the left? come up with something instead of just saying, look at all these liberals, aren't they so lame, you know. Go like do something productive, you know, like say what could we on the left do better to fight back against this stuff instead of just repeating the same old Anita Sarkeesian crap. Not that she's like a bad person, but like it's the ice cold takes here. The task of collective self-mastery requires a hyperstitional manipulation of desire's puppet strings, and deployment of semiotic operators over a terrain of highly networked cultural systems, whatever the fuck that means. The will always be corrupted by the memes in which it traffics, but nothing prevents us from instrumentalizing this fact and calibrating it in view of the ends of its desires. They're trying to say, like, if you're gonna have memes where you just like say something a lot, it needs to be specifically, it needs to be more like agitprop, right? It can't just be like check your privilege, because that doesn't work. Like, you have to actually get under people's skin in a way that doesn't just put them off immediately. But yeah, okay, here we go. Here's the fun part, everyone. This is when everyone starts to argue about terminology because they don't realize that everyone already agrees on the exact same things, but they really don't like the term gender abolitionist because TERFs have appropriated it. Oh boy. Xenofeminism is gender abolitionist. Gender abolitionism is not code for the eradication of what are currently considered gendered traits from the human population. Jesus Christ in heaven, please. Please. Can we get this far, please? Okay, under patriarchy, such a project could only spell disaster. The notion of what is gendered sticks to disproportion. Okay, not hot take. To the feminine. But even if this balance were redressed, we have no interest in seeing the sexual diversity of the world reduced. Let 100 sexes bloom. Gender abolitionism is shorthand, thank you, for the ambition to construct a society where traits currently assembled under the rubric of gender no longer furnish a good for the asymmetric operation of power. Race abolitionism expands into a similar formula, that the struggle must continue until currently racialized characteristics are no more a basis of discrimination than the color of one's eyes. Ultimately, every emancipatory abolitionism must incline towards the horizon of class abolitionism, since it is in capitalism where we encounter oppression in its transparent, denaturalized form. You're not exploited or oppressed because you are a wage laborer or poor. You are a laborer or poor because you are exploited. Okay. So, can we at least... We've gotten past that fun. First, fuck yes, this section in particular. You're being exasperatingly done with the neolids and people who can't grasp such stuff. Yeah, and, oh god. It's amazing how many people that I talk to still don't understand the gender abolitionism thing. Ren gets it. I think they've gotten it, but one thing I've noticed is that, it seems like only other NBs get this. That's one thing I notice a lot. I don't know what that means. I haven't tried to explore theory of like why might that be, but I have some ideas. I won't say them, but I have some ideas. All right. Xenofeminism understands that the viability of emancipatory abolitionist projects, the abolition of class, gender, and race. Kind of blame TERFs for some. Yeah, they literally called out TERFs earlier, I think, for that particular one, which I agree on an optics level, but like, it's still not wrong. Like, it's like we want the same. We still want it. Just because TERFs have appropriated the term doesn't mean. Other reasons are things I prefer to keep private communications. Yeah. Yeah. Xenofeminism understands that the viability of emancipatory abolitionist projects, the abolition of class, gender, and race, hinges on a profound reworking of the universal. The universal must be grasped as generic, which is to say intersectional. Intersectionality is not the morcellation of collectives into static fuzz of cross-referenced identities, but a political orientation that slices through every particular, refusing to the crass pigeonholing of bodies. This is not a universal that can be imposed from above, but built from the bottom up, or better, laterally opening new lines of transit across an uneven landscape. I'm sorry for the hand talking, but it's very fun. This non-absolute generic universality must guard against the facile tendency of conflation with bloated, unmarked particulars, namely Eurocentric universalism, whereby the male is mistaken for the sexless, the white for the raceless, the cis for the real, and so on. This isn't a very hot take, but, you know, whatever. Absent such a universal, the abolition of class will remain a bourgeois fantasy, the abolition of race will remain a tacit white supremacism, and the abolition of gender will remain a thinly veiled misogyny. TERFs. Even, especially... Here, they're literally calling out TERFs here, especially when prosecuted by avowed feminists themselves. The absurd and reckless spectacle of so many self-proclaimed gender abolitionists campaign against trans women is proof enough for this. Right, there you go. There you go. This is why I don't... All of these people who are arguing about the gender abolition thing, I always tell them to just read this damn thing. Read these fucking, like, 2 paragraphs, and, like, there's another one earlier, is like, just read this so we can please just understand where we're coming from here, so we don't have to argue about terms the whole time. Okay. Let's see here. And then here's a bunch of Zizek crap. It's okay. It's not that bad. Alright. 10, aka 11. From the postmoderns, we have learnt to burn the facades of the false universal and dispel such confusions. From the moderns, we have learnt to sift new universals from the ashes of the false. Xenofeminism seeks to construct a coalitional politics, a politics without the infection of purity. Okay. Wielding... This is an interesting, I think what they're saying is, while we do have certain, long-term goals that we have to deal with, you have to sort of be... It's like realpolitik, but for leftism, which is an interesting thing, I guess. It is interesting. It's like, ally with people now and build coalitions in order to get rid of the need for you to ally with that person later on, even like if you disagree with them. It's a little cynical, but I don't know. I don't know if they're wrong. That's the thing. It's hard for me to not feel the same way. Alright, let's see here. Wielding the universal requires thoughtful qualification and precise self-reflection so as to become a ready-to-hand tool for multiple political bodies and something that can be appropriated against the numerous oppressions that transect with gender and sexuality. The universal is no blueprint, and rather than dictate its uses in advance, we propose xenofeminism as a platform. The very process of construction is therefore understood to be negentropic, iterative, and continual refashioning. What more with the sort of Maoist stuff? Not sure what the deal is. Not that they're wrong. I mean, Mao's particular contributions in this area were actually totally fine. It was the things that Mao did that are problematic. But some of his philosophical writings in this specific area are actually quite good. Anyway, xenofeminism seeks to be a mutable architecture, like open source software, that remains available for perpetual modification and enhancement following the navigational impulse of militant ethical reasoning. Open, however, does not mean undirected. The most durable systems in the world owe their stability to the way they train order to emerge as an invisible hand from apparent spontaneity, or exploit the inertia of investment and sedimentation. We should not hesitate to learn from our adversaries or the successes and failures of history. With this in mind, xenofeminism seeks ways to seed an order that is equitable and just, injecting it into the geometry of freedoms these platforms afford. I have a problem with the invisible hand crap. Because so on the surface they're not entirely wrong about like from apparent spontaneity, right? Like they do say apparent, right? I think they are sort of lampshading the idea that the invisible hand is just a load of bullshit, but I think what they're saying is that you have to guide things in a way that it's not obvious, which is, I don't know why we would need to do that. That's what I'm not sure about. Why do we have to conceal the sort of overall intentions of the system that we build? If the system that we build is supposed to be good, why do we have to try and build things into the system that are sort of hidden, that train things to happen the way capitalism does? I'm not really sure what they're actually getting at there. It's a weird idea to me. 10. Okay. Alright, 11. Our lot is cast with technoscience, where nothing is so sacred that it cannot be re-engineered and transformed so as to widen our aperture of freedom, extending to gender and the human. To say that nothing is sacred, that nothing is transcendent or protected from the will to know, to tinker, and to hack, is to say that nothing is supernatural. Nature, understood here as the unbounded arena of science, is all there is. And so, in tearing down melancholy and illusion, the unambitious and the non-scalable, the libidinized puritanism of certain online cultures, Twitter? Like, is it Twitter? Just say Twitter. And nature as an unremarkable given, we find that our normative anti-naturalism has pushed us towards an unflinching ontological naturalism. There is nothing we claim that cannot be studied scientifically and manipulated technology. Okay, yeah, so this is what I was getting at. I don't even think anyone who's listening now was even here in the beginning, but in the beginning they have a thing, where are we at? 11? Here. So when they're talking about anti-naturalism in the first, second paragraph here, they almost give off the idea that they're entirely against the idea of having some sort of nature at all. But as I previously pointed out with this paragraph, they really aren't actually going as hard anti-naturalist as one might think, and they're literally saying right here they're actually fine with naturalism as long as it's not prescriptive, basically. Okay. And as long as that nature that is, described by science is not then turned around and used to, control people or oppress people or whatever, right? Or even just to classify things as natural or unnatural, as wrong or right, Okay. This does not mean that the distinction between the ontological and the normative, between fact and value, is simply cut and dried. The vectors of normative anti-naturalism and ontological naturalism span many ambivalent battlefields. I hate the way they wrote this. The project of untangling what ought to be from what is, of dissociating freedom from fact, will from knowledge, is indeed an infinite task. There are many lacunae where desire confronts us with the brutality of fact, where beauty is indissociable from truth. Poetry, sex, technology, and pain are incandescent with this tension we have traced. But give up on the task of revision, release the reins, and slacken that tension, and these filaments instantly dim. What the fuck are they talking about? I hate this paragraph. Oh my god. let's see here. What do I have anything that could help me deal with this? Untangling what ought to be from what is. What? I've read this like 5 times. I still don't understand this part. They just have all these weird illustrations for things that I think doesn't help at all. It just makes it worse. It's harder to read. Did they have like a minimum word count they were going for or something? Like I'm gonna try and think about this. Philosophical randomly. Exactly. And that's what like half of this thing is. It's so annoying. Boy. Whatever. I don't like. Does this stuff even need to be said at all? Like, I don't know. Okay, whatever. We'll just go to here. Alright. The potential of early text-based internet culture for countering repressive gender regimes, generating solidarity among marginalized groups, and creating new spaces for experimentation that ignited cyberfeminism in the 90s has clearly waned in the 21st century. So, the person who was talking in Theory's chat before, forgot their name, actually had some criticism that was very similar to this regarding the liberal appropriation of identities. Blaze. No, not Blaze. It was a person in chat, like someone who, as far as I can tell, had never even been to the channel before. They actually weren't a troll for once. Let's see here. The dominance of the visual in today's online interfaces has reinstated familiar modes of identity, policing, power relations, and there was plenty of actual discussion generated, which was nice. Power relations and gender norms in self-representation. But this does not mean that cyberfeminist sensibilities belong to the past. Okay, I think what they're kind of getting at is that in social media, like, if you present yourself in social media, especially in a larger platform, you are going to be subject to the same problems of you know, walking around in real life presenting yourself in a certain way, because it's public. And so they're saying that, like, not having like pictures of yourself was good for keeping people from falling into like socially constructed gender bullshit. But now it's you can't do that anymore, is basically what they're saying, which is true. But what do they have to say about how to deal with it? That's what I want to know. But this does not mean that cyberfeminist sensibilities belong to the past. Sorting the subversive possibilities from the oppressive ones latent in today's web requires a feminism sensitive to the insidious return of old power structures, yet savvy enough to know how to exploit the potential. So the insidious return of old power structures. This reminds me of what Theory likes to talk about with like manufacturing consent, right? How like people for a while thought that manufacturing consent was kind of dead, like the old ways that they did things are dead because of the internet, and how now it's actually we're realizing now that it's still the same, or it's coming back. Like maybe there was a brief period where it wasn't there because the internet was new, but now the internet is being completely accumulated into the realm of capital again. Which this is the same thing, except it's just specifically focusing on feminism, I guess. Okay. Digital technologies are not separable from the material realities that underwrite them. They are connected so that each can be used to alter the other towards different ends. Rather than arguing for the primacy of the virtual over the material, or the material over the virtual, xenofeminism grasps points of power and powerlessness in both to unfold this knowledge as effective interventions in our jointly composed reality. That's not a hot take. Yeah, we should use the internet and also do things in real life. Okay. Intervention in more obviously material hegemonies is just as crucial as intervention in digital and cultural ones. Changes to the built environment harbor some of the most significant possibilities in the reconfiguration of the horizons of women and queers, which I think I'm allowed to say. It's just kind of weird that they write it that way. I think they're like UK people. They spell things differently. I don't know how the culture is there with that term, but as the embodiment of ideological constellations, the production of space and the decisions we make for its organization are ultimately articulations about us, and reciprocally how a we can be articulated, with the potential to foreclose, restrict, or open up future social conditions. Xenofeminists must become attuned to the language of architecture as a vocabulary for collective choreography, the coordinated reign of space. They took this whole paragraph to say, we should rethink our living spaces. And then they're going to send another whole paragraph on it. For the street to the home, domestic space too must not escape our tentacles. Like, the tentacles line is funny. Okay, it's funny. So profoundly ingrained, domestic space has been deemed impossible to disembed, where the home as norm has been conflated with home as fact, and it's an unremarkable given. Stultifying domestic realism has no home on our horizon. What's with the puns? Let us set sights on augmented homes of shared laboratories, or communal media and technical facilities. The home is ripe for spatial transformation as an integral component of in any process of feminist futurity, but this cannot stop at the garden gates. God damn it. We see too well that the reinventions of family structure and domestic life are currently only possible at the cost of either withdrawing from the economic sphere, the way of the commune, or bearing its burdens manyfold, the way of the single parent. If we want to break the inertia that has kept the moribund figure of the nuclear family unit in place, which has stubbornly worked to isolate women from the public sphere and men from the lives of their children, while penalizing those who stray from it, we must overhaul the material infrastructure and break the economic cycles that lock it in place. The task before us is twofold, and our vision necessarily stereoscopic. We must engineer an economy that liberates reproductive labor and family life, while building models of familiality free from the deadening grind of wage labor. Okay, they'd spent all of that to say, we should probably have different forms of living spaces that are more communal in nature, and also we should like abolish capitalism, and also like Full Surrogacy Now by Sophie Lewis. Read that book. Is that what I'm getting from this? Okay, what maybe, is there anything I missed in this? I have some notes, but like that was not the most it's kind of lame. Okay, 16. Here's the fun part. From the home, this is the open source medicine part, which is contentious. They really could have stood to be condensed. Yeah, that's the entire document in a nutshell. From the home to the body, the articulation of a proactive politics for biotechnical intervention and hormones presses. Hormones hack into gender systems possessing political scope extending beyond the aesthetic calibration of individual bodies. Oh my god. Thought structurally the distribution of hormones, who or what this distribution prioritizes or pathologizes, is of paramount import. The rise of the internet and the hydra of black market pharmacies is let loose, together with a publicly accessible archive of endocrinological know-how, was instrumental in wresting control of the hormonal economy away from gatekeeping institutions seeking to mitigate threats to established distributions of the sexual. To trade in the rule of bureaucrats for the market is, however, not a victory in itself. These tides need to rise higher. We ask whether the idiom of gender hacking is extensible into a long-range strategy, a strategy for wetware akin to what hacker culture has already done for software. Constructing an entire universe of free and open source platforms that is the closest thing to a practicable communism, or practicable, I guess, communism many of us has ever seen. So fully automated luxury medicine, communist medicine, I don't know. Without the foolhardy endangerment of lives, can we stitch together the embryonic promises held before us by pharmaceutical 3D printing, grassroots telemedical abortion clinics? That's an interesting, I'll have to show you what that is. Gender hacktivist and DIY HRT forums, and so on, to assemble a platform for free and open source medicine. Yeah, so the open source medicine thing gets really contentious, but I want to point out, hack the planet. I don't care. I am very open to jokesters. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for so here's an example of what it is. Well, you know what, here, I'll just explain how it works. So the telemedical abortion clinics, for people who don't know, because I had to look this up the first time I read this, is basically you drive around in a van, and in the van, you've got, like, there's a drawer, and it's locked, and the lock can only be opened remotely, and in the drawer is your pill, to administer the abortion. And you get into the van. This is, I know it sounds sketchy, but trust me. You get in the van, okay, and you get on the phone with a doctor who can control the drawer, and you call them, and then they explain the stuff, and then they explain how it works, blah blah blah. They do all the stuff. It's like having a clinic visit, but not in person. And then it prints out like a waiver, and you sign it, and then it scans it back and whatever, and then they confirm everything, and then they press a button, and it opens the drawer, and you get the abortion pill. That's what it is. It's a phenomenal idea. Yeah, I think in Idaho or one of those states, like Idaho or Wyoming, like in that area, where they, like, it might have been Wyoming, where it's like there's like no, like, institutional, there's no, like, you'd have to drive like 500 miles to get to an abortion clinic, right? That kind of thing. They have those, and they're legal, I think, theoretically. Like, I mean, they are legal, but anyway, so yeah. Yeah, so open source medicine. Okay, from the global to the local, from the cloud to our bodies, xenofeminism avows the responsibility in constructing new institutions of techno-materialist hegemonic proportions. Stop with the big words, it hurts my brain. Like engineers who must conceive of a total structure as well as the molecular parts from which it is constructed, xenofeminism emphasizes the importance of the mesopolitical sphere against the limited effectiveness of local gestures, creation of autonomous zones, and sheer horizontalism. Just as it stands against the transcendent or top-down, they're centrists, right? They're centrists between Stalin and Bakunin. Values and norms. The mesopolitical arena of xenofeminism's universalist ambitions comprehends itself as a mobile and intricate network of transits between these polarities. As pragmatists, they really are enlightened centrists with this issue. We invite contamination as a mutational driver between such frontiers. This is the thing. They did this as pragmatists, right? But then earlier in the thing, somewhere in here, they like called out centrists who like they didn't say pragmatists, but it was like realistic, right? They called people out for like doing certain things based on realism, and now here they're doing the same thing themselves, and it's so funny. Okay, 70, yeah, okay, pragmatist, yeah, okay. So they're Luxembourgists? I don't know. Alright, so this is the end of the thing. So we've got 18. Xenofeminism asserts that adapting our behavior. I'm reading through this quite quickly now. I've read it enough times, I guess. It doesn't take me 5 hours to read the whole thing anymore. Xenofeminism asserts that adapting our behavior for an era of Promethean complexity is a labor requiring patience, but a ferocious patience at odds with waiting. Calibrating a political hegemony or insurgent memeplex not only implies the creation of material infrastructures. That's one word. Maybe it's not spelled as one word in the UK or something, but it's one word. Come on. To make the values it articulates explicit, but places demands on us as subjects. How are we to become hosts of this new world? How do we build a better semiotic parasite, one that arouses the desires we want to desire, that orchestrates not an autophagic orgy of indignity or rage? Good morning, Ida. But an emancipatory and egalitarian community buttressed by new forms of unselfish solidarity and collective self-mastery. This is, I got distracted, so I had to like rethink this. What are they saying here? What the heck? Oh, right. So basically they're saying we need to engineer memes. Better memes. We need to engineer memes in order to use as propaganda. As far as I can tell, that's what they're going for here. Whatever. That's, yeah, I guess. Sure, yeah. But I think that's what copy pasta agitprop is about, don't you think? And Theory has read this and other similar manifestos before, so I think they're with it. They know what it's about. Alright. Is xenofeminism a program? Not if this means anything so crude as a recipe or a single-purpose tool by which a determinate problem is solved. We prefer to think like the schemer or lisper who seeks to construct a new language in which the problem at hand is immersed, so that solutions for it, and for any number of related problems, might unfurl with ease. Xenofeminism is a platform, an incipient ambition to construct a new language for sexual politics, a language that seizes its own methods as materials to be reworked, and incrementally bootstraps itself into existence. This is the Xenofeminist Manifesto, which is from 2015, and I feel like it's already, yeah, it's already kind of outdated. They complain about like Twitter drama basically, but like the Twitter drama they're complaining about is really outdated. It's kind of funny actually, because Twitter drama just moves so fast, you know. Where were we? They're left accelerationists and like super feminist, very queer positive group that wrote this, but it's like super academic. Like they all wrote it for like their master's thesis or something, so it's like really hard to read. Let's see here. We understand that the problems we face are systemic and interlocking, and that any chance of global success depends on infecting myriad skills and contexts with the logic of xenofeminism. Ours is a transformation of seeping directed subsumption rather than rapid overthrow. So this, earlier in the thing they were talking about, like, we're not calling for revolution, we're calling for whatever, and this is, what exactly are they, like, do they know we only have, like, 8 years or something to deal with climate change? Like, it is a transformation of deliberate construction, seeking to submerge the white supremacist capitalist patriarchy in a sea of procedures that soften its shell and dismantle its defenses, so as to build a new world from the scraps. How much time do you have to do that? Because I think you have about 0 time to do that. If you want to do the literal cultural Marxism, not like conspiracy theory cultural Marxism, but like actually trying to do cultural Marxism, uh, I'm not really sure how much time you had to do it. Um, it's weird how it's like they're accelerationists, but then they're like a different kind of accelerationist. They're like a cultural accelerationist instead of like um, uh, violently overthrow capitalism accelerationists. It's interesting. Um, okay. In the last paragraph, finally. Xenofeminism indexes the desire to construct an alien future with a triumphant X on a mobile map. This X does not mark a destination, it is the insertion of a topological keyframe for the formation of a new logic. In affirming a future unfettered by the repetition of the present, we militate God, these words. We militate for ampliative capacities, for spaces of freedom with a richer geometry than the aisle, the assembly line, and the feed. We need new affordances of perception and action unblinkered by naturalized identities. In the name of feminism, nature shall no longer be a refuge of injustice or a basis of any political justification whatsoever. If nature is unjust, change nature. All right. Yeah. So you just joined, Ida. So this entire thing is written like that, and it's a pain in the ass to read. Hence the deciphering part of my stream title. This is the most. I don't know why I am so interested in this particular document. Probably just because of how eccentric it is in the way that it's written. It doesn't have the most hot takes. It doesn't have, anything that's new to us in 2019. But this was written in 2015, like I said. So I don't know. Like, they're complaining about all of this online discourse, and it's like this was the online discourse they're complaining about in 2015, but the online discourse in 2019 is probably different. Like, as far as I can tell, the things they're complaining about aren't a problem anymore, like on the online left, so to speak, right? The extremely online left, not the Twitch streamer extremely online left, but the extremely online left as a whole. Doesn't seem to have the problems they're complaining about anymore. There's a bit more of a focus, right? Like, people are a little bit less falling into these problems that they describe, and a lot of they seem to have this weird, almost like, I know that they don't really conflate left with liberalism, but they seem to think that online liberal feminism is the leftist the most left that it gets, and I don't know if that was true in 2015, but it's definitely not true anymore. So in terms of the actual critiques they have of the leftist discourse, I just don't think it's relevant anymore, even though it's only been 4 years. I don't know. There's like, it's relevant to the it's historic time in a Twitter drama. No. But it's like, you can tell that these people were embedded in like feminist Twitter drama or maybe Tumblr drama at the time, because they're constantly complaining about how people talk online, and like they don't specifically say the phrase cancel culture, but like they have like a whole thing complaining about it and stuff like that. And it's like, they're falling in the same problem as like Mark Fisher, where he wrote the Vampire Castle essay, which I think is a piece of trash, where he's complaining about Twitter drama, and it's like the he's complaining about these things as if they're coming from the left, when they're not coming from the left. They're coming from liberals, and it's like, was there some, like, and the fact that these people who wrote this document, who are like explicitly leftists, also seem to think that in 2015 the liberals that they're very obviously complaining about are the left. It's really like, why would both Mark Fisher and these people make this same very obvious mistake? I don't get it. And it's like, I don't know, you know, I don't have the time or the you know, impetus to go back and look and see if somebody has documented what these people might be talking about on 2015 on Tumblr feminist spheres and liberal identity politics bullshit on Twitter. Like, I just don't care. I don't need to go back and read all of that stuff. Like, this just isn't relevant anymore. And the parts that are relevant are like the gender abolition stuff, which is relevant to the modern discourse that I see on Twitch, I think, mainly because of people still not understanding what gender abolition actually means if you're not talking from like a TERF perspective, right? Which they specifically called out in this, which I'm, so one reason why I actually like this a little bit, you know. But like, there's not much in here that's new, or you know, there's no hot takes, but I've said this in my review, and I'll pull it up again for the people who are new, because I've written a review of this a while ago. Let me see, I said something about, yeah, okay, so overall I found this text to be simultaneously very interesting read simply due to its obscurity and rather unhelpful due to its relentless academic jargon, needless repetition, and outright lack of new or concrete ideas. Read it if you are able and willing, but don't expect anything radically new or immediately actionable. Perhaps it could be useful as an outline for a much larger and more accessibly written work. And add to that now, and I'm reading this like for the 5th time, maybe it would be useful as a outline for a much larger and more accessibly written work that is specifically meant to introduce liberals to leftist feminism, because this is just not it's nothing new if you're coming from the left. But if you're coming from liberalism, you might actually get something out of this if it wasn't written in such a way as to completely alienate anybody who doesn't already have a really academic feminist background. Because it's just so, the way it's written is just so annoying. And so verbose, that's the word. Overly verbose. And so because of that, because I think there is a potentially useful stuff in here in terms of talking, this is a good outline for how to talk to liberals about why their feminism is useless, right? It's a good outline for coming up with a program to try and convince liberals that they're wrong. And that is why my next video series is going to be on this document and trying to go through it and demystify it. Kudos to anyone who can get liberal feminists to actually listen. Yeah, I mean, that's, it's more like, you know, it's like you have to point out to them, and this is why that one part that I didn't like about how they're like using right-wing talking points, right? The liberals will see that you're using right-wing talking points, and it's like the right-wing talking points are kind of correct in some ways, but they come at it from the wrong direction. And so it's like on the surface you have a good critique of the optics, but then you don't really have the right reasons for being against it. And so that's one problem with this document as well, right? Like, it's some of the critiques that it has are not good optics for trying to convince liberals, because the liberals are going to think that you're a right-winger criticizing them. That's another thing, is that all liberals think that when you're criticizing them, you're a right-winger. Because liberalism is so insidious in that it has infected every level of culture to such a degree, and then placed this fake, conservative faction to their right as the scapegoat for everything bad that ever happens, right? And so then if you go to a liberal and say, I think the reason why Trump won is actually because your candidate was totally useless, they fucking hate you. They can't stand the idea that they are wrong or that their platform was bad. They cannot be wrong. And this is like the same thing as, like, I'm sorry, I will utter his name once. Destiny. Same shit. He's a perfect example of how these liberals act when you try and challenge them from the left. Because it's like they're so used to always battling people on the right, and then they freak the fuck out when somebody comes from the left, because they can't even fathom the idea of anything that is further left than liberals in the mainstream. And they just think that they're being attacked. It's like they think they're used to attacks on them being like bad, and then they can't deal with a correct attack on them, and they try to fight back in the same way, and it never works. This is why the person I mentioned is always making a massive fool of himself whenever he tries to debate leftists, because all he ends up doing is yelling a lot of wrong things very loudly and rapidly, because that's how if you want to debate a right-winger, all you have to do is yell a bunch of correct things very loudly and rapidly, and eventually they might shut up or go away. It's so beautiful. Yeah. And then it's like, as soon as you try to use the exact same tactic to defend a position that is wrong, you look like a complete buffoon. Oh boy. Alright. Yeah. So that was the whole frickin' manifesto. I did it in under 2 hours. That's a record. This thing is so hard to read. I think it's number 6 on my my readings of this ridiculous document. And I'm afraid I'm gonna have to read it a lot more to make that video series. Yeah. Oh boy. And what I'll actually have to be doing when I make the video series is downloading this VOD and like replaying it to myself a million times, so I don't actually have to read it physically, and just like write more notes while I listen to it. And so in terms of actually making a video series, I have a couple of ideas for how to structure it, like what specifically the video should be about. So my first thought is to basically do what I did in this stream, but script it, and like read the manifesto, read each part, and then comment on the thing, which is kind of like what I'm doing with the Scum Manifesto, but like actually script it instead of just saying it live like I'm doing right now. Or the other idea is to condense all of the different ideas that it does put forward and all the different subjects that it covers into specific categories and make a video for each thing. So like I can talk about gender abolition in one video, or I could talk about anti-naturalism in another video, etc., etc. And I'm not really sure. I'm thinking, so one thing that I was thinking is like doing it sort of more like the alt-right playbook series, where I have like a main part of the series where I do the, you know, read the section and then rant about it for a bit, and just go through the whole thing that way. But then also have side videos where I explain certain concepts more in depth, which is the, you know, so that idea requires the most work, and I don't know which, what I'm not sure is, do I really need to do the thing where I just read through the whole thing? Because like if I'm going to do individual concepts explained, I could just read out the passages in those videos that are relevant to that particular concept. But at the same time, that requires me to do a lot more work in terms of figuring out what order to do things in, what to, you know, because like this thing is already written out. It's like an outline already. Providing a link to source material and reading relevance is the best way to go. Yeah, I mean, I like to read out, like, since it's not that long, I would like to, over the course of the video series, have everything get read out. Because, I mean, one of the main reasons why I even do any of my YouTube videos is because a lot of people like to listen to something or can't read or whatever, have a hard time reading. And so, like, I'm not sure, like, obviously I can provide a link to the thing, but I'm trying to figure out, like, because if I do it just in the order that this is in, then I don't really have to think about, like, structuring a certain video series. I can just, it would be really easy in terms of the planning, because the planning is read it and then rant about it for a bit, and then listen to my rantings, and then write notes, and then come up with a scripted response, and then cut that in after each section that I read, with, you know, maybe some pictures or whatever. You like my voice? Yeah. The voice that I talk in when I right now is not the same as like my reading voice that I've been doing on my videos, because it's really difficult for me to do that without like actively thinking. You know, 'cause usually I'll talk something more like this, very closer to the microphone, and you know, this blah 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 blah. You know, is usually how I end up doing things for the YouTube videos. I think because it provides, I think, more consistent audio levels when I do it that way, and it's like maybe just softer and not like, you know, I don't want to suddenly have something that's like really loud, just could like be annoying or startling. But also then at the same time, if you're too close to the microphone, it starts screwing up the audio levels more as a percentage. If you accidentally move like 2 inches further back from the microphone while you're really close to the microphone, it will make a bigger difference in the volume than if I were 3 feet away from the microphone and I moved 2 inches back. There would be practically no discernible difference in the volume. So it's like you have to weigh them, I guess. It's kind of a difficult thing to figure out. Recording is is interesting science. Yeah. Alright. It's tempting to do videos as voice training practice, but you know, I don't know. I have you know, a lot of people who are IRL friends of mine who are not particularly aware of my situation, so and who know about my handle, so it's kind of annoying actually, you know. But anyway, let's see here. Alright, I got the captions set up. I think I had it on the last stream too, but let's see here. Do I have anything else to say about this particular thing? Probably not. I have, yeah, I do have the notes already, but it's like I need more notes. More notes. It's tempting to do some jokey parts, like mimetic engineering. I feel like I could make a whole video about mimetic engineering. There's so many like references that I want to throw in too, and like that bit at the end where it says, oh, 19, sorry, at the end. Seeping is directed subsumption rather than rapid overthrow. This whole part here. That sounds a lot like the overall theory that what's the name? Suck My Opinion on YouTube seems to have similar opinions regarding how we should be going about things in the first world, so to speak. Like, how do you actually, like, you're not gonna have some glorious people's revolution in the United States. Like, it's probably not gonna happen. It's not a really good idea either. You know, I don't know, maybe Brett O'Shea would have a different opinion than me on that, but, I'm not a tanky, so, and that's what I was talking about, the cultural Marxism thing, where it's like, you know, cultural Marxism was, or cultural Bolshevism was a conspiracy theory created by the Nazis, where they said that the Jews or whoever are trying to infiltrate our culture with their socialist lies or something, you know, that sort of thing. And it's like, they weren't, but like, that's not the half bad idea. And that's sort of where Suck My Opinion is coming from. But like, what, you know, what does he do, right? Art, you know, poetry, songs and stuff, right? It was like his idea is to inject the theory into the art, which, I mean, it's not like that hasn't been tried before, you know, but I mean, like, could it be done on a more coordinated level? Is that what they're getting at here in this paragraph? Like, are they saying we need to have like a shadow organization for creating art and memes and other things that media that people are exposed to that could potentially try and, you know, knock them on the head and get them out of that capitalist realism mindset a little bit? You know, like, could you inject agitprop into the cultures? I guess the question, can you do it fast enough to deal with the things that we need to deal with at the moment? You know, they didn't, this is 2015, they didn't have Trump. And it's like, on one hand, I don't like to, you know, fall into the trap of saying that, you know, Trump is the source of all the problems or whatever, but like, the fact that Trump is in office is certainly complicates a few of these things, right? Like, if there had been a Democrat elected in 2016, aka Hillary Clinton, it would have been mildly easier to potentially work on starting to do something about climate change. Maybe just a little bit. Not because Hillary Clinton would have actually cared about doing anything about climate change. The fact is that there will be, yeah, an easier fire in hands, and it's specifically because Trump has actively increased militarization of police and number of police in areas where he thinks that, you know, uprisings could be more possible. And it's like there's a very obvious repression of freedom of assembly and whatnot. And, you know, while certainly under Obama, that was a, you know, Obama wasn't as bad as Trump on that regard, but Obama was quite terrible on that as well. But, you know, still, it would have been better than what it is now. And the question is, you know, would it be able to, you know, do anything if you had like an Occupy Wall Street style thing that was a little bit more focused on climate change, for example? Because we don't have that, right? Like, we have some mild attempts at that, but they can't get off the ground because of this massive, I don't want to use the particular term fascist, but massive far-right resurgence in most of the so-called Western world, and also in even other countries as well, where the Western world is very influential. And it's like they are playing with fire a bit by doing that, right? Like, they're kind of, you know, pushing the limits a little bit. They seem to think that eco-fascism or whatever is probably going to be the solution, because it's like, you've got, especially like even just looking at the United States, you've got like militarizing the border and building the wall and stuff, and it's like, why do that? What is the point? Unless you expect a massive amount of refugees to try and come into the country. Why would you build a damn Great Wall of China, you know, or equivalent on our southern border? Unless you actually expect some massive, like, literal army to try and come in. And it's like, is it really their solution to the problems of climate change to just like shoot 1 million people who try and come into our country, so to speak? Like, is that really what they're trying to do? Do they believe that they can pull that off, is the question, right? Do they think that that's going to be allowed by other world governments? Do they think that that's going to be like is Mexico going to declare war on the United States for you know, murdering refugees? Like, is that a thing that they think is not out of, or is out of the question? Do they not think that somebody is going to be like, hey, United States, could you please not do a fascist genocide any more than you already are, at least, right? Like, because that would be such an overt thing. That would be ridiculous. That, like, you can't just, like, if, let's say you know, over the next 30 years, we start seeing, like, I don't know, what's a good number? 10 million. That's probably an underestimation, but 10 million people per year at some point start trying to enter from, like, the equatorial regions, right, that are suffering the most from climate change. Like, are they literally just planning to, like, shoot them all? What are they trying to do here? What's the point in building the wall? So it's like there's either they're planning to do an eco-fascist route, or the only reason they want to build the wall is because they want money for military contractors, and, like, not, they don't actually, they're not going to do a fascism completely, right? They're not going to do a genocide totally. Like, they just want the money from building the wall. And it's like that's possible, and that would be better than the other option. But that also makes it sort of seem a little bit like, I think that gives Trump a little bit too much credit, right? Like, because that's sort of blaming it all on Trump again, because, like, that's the sort of thing Trump would do, is, like, one of his buddies owns a concrete factory or something, and we're gonna build a wall, and Trump needs to give him a contract. It's like, that sounds like the kind of thing that the liberal media wants you to believe Trump would do. So it's like they have a big incentive for you to think that that's what Trump's doing with the whole wall thing. So I'm wary of that, and also the potential for harm is so great that I don't think we can rule out the eco-fascist potential here. If that's where they want to go with it, it would be an absolute disaster.